we have started extracting laminarin directly from the seaweeds rather than feeding the whole seaweed. And we have found we'll get somewhere in the region of about a 9% improvement in average daily gain over a negative control from the use of laminarin. And the reason for it, we have seen very, very strong prebiotic effects. We have seen increase in 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗃 bacteria in the post-wean pigs, in the post-wean pig gut. And, research would have shown that 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗃 is very, very important for improved feed efficiency in the pig.
Welcome to the Swine Nutrition Blackbelt Podcast, the latest swine nutrition research digested for you. I'm your host, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗃𝗃, and today we have with us Dr. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗃𝗃, a full professor of monogastric nutrition at the University College Dublin. So John, before we begin, could you tell the audience a little bit about your background?
I completed a bachelor's degree in agricultural science in 1987, a master's in animal science in 1989. In 1994, I completed a PhD in animal nutrition, all these in University College Dublin. And in 2014, I gained a DSc degree from the National University of Ireland based on published work. After completing my PhD, I took up a post at University College Dublin as college lecturer within the Department of Animal Science and Production. And I got the usual promotions through the years. And in 2017, I was promoted to full professor of monogastric nutrition. I'm currently head of animal and crop sciences in University College in Dublin. I suppose over the years, I have supervised in the region of about 40 PhD students, 20 postdoctoral fellows, and about 40 master degree students by research. And I have published about 300 grade A publications in peer-reviewed journals.
Gotcha. So yeah, like you said, it seems like you have a lot of extensive research into a lot of different topics. One of them I wanted to kind of touch on today is some work that you've been doing regarding gut digestive health. So I guess just to start us off, what all research have you been looking into lately regarding gut digestive health?
Yeah, the area of work I have been working on is digestive health, particularly in the post-wean pig. And for years, traditional measures to reduce weaning-associated intestinal dysfunction have centered on the dietary inclusion of in-feed medication in pig diets or high concentrations of zinc oxide. In the EU, however, zinc oxide was banned in 2022. Now we have a lot more regulations around the use of in-feed medication. So there has been a large requirement for alternative dietary supplements that can support growth and gastrointestinal health and function in the post-wean pig. And that's where we have worked over the last 10 years or so. We have looked at a diverse range of feed additives over that 10 years or so. And we have also mined various natural ingredients to identify bioactives that are present in natural ingredients. And we have looked at everything from milk and milk hydrolysis to chitins, to yeast, to mushrooms, vitamin E or selenium induced or enhanced mushrooms, vitamin D enhanced mushrooms. But we have particularly looked at seaweed and looking at some of the bioactives that are present in seaweed. And worldwide, there is a lot of interest in seaweed. But our earlier work would suggest that whole seaweed or whole macroalgae have not been really successful in promoting digestive health. And it is the composition of the seaweed that's important, particularly the carbohydrates present in the seaweed that's important. And the problem with whole seaweeds is that the application of intact macroalgae, the nutritional value of it varies quite a lot due to the species that are used, season of harvest, geographic location, and environmental conditions that it's grown in. And all that is going to influence basically chemical composition. So if you look at something like laminarin, you could see a 5-fold difference in the concentration of laminarin in this time of the year versus, for example, December time of the year. So the result that you get when you feed that product is going to be totally different. So what that has meant for us is that we have started extracting laminarin directly from the seaweeds rather than feeding the whole seaweed. And we have found we'll get somewhere in the region of about a 9% improvement in average daily gain over a negative control from the use of laminarin. And the reason for it, we have seen very, very strong prebiotic effects. We have seen increase in 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗃 bacteria in the post-wean pigs, in the post-wean pig gut. And, research would have shown that 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗃 is very, very important for improved feed efficiency in the pig. And also what we see is that we see a major increase in butyrate production in the large intestine as well. So that's some of the mode of actions that we get. But we also get very, very strong anti-inflammatory effects in both in the small intestine and the large intestine from the use of laminarin, and where we get a major reduction, for example, in pro-inflammatory cytokines. But I suppose the challenge for us with laminarin is to be able to large scale produce that laminarin. And that's why we see a lot of whole seaweed being fed. I think it's not that successful. You've got to extract the laminarins, the 𝗪𝗪𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 in order to get a better response. But there is a challenge there in terms of large scale extracting those products. But the mechanisms are now becoming available.
Yeah, and I also saw that you were working on some work with acidified grains as a preservation method and kind of looking at life cycle assessment within pigs. Could you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, we're looking at organic acids, particularly propionic acid. Organic acids have been fed for years in post-wean pig diets and basically all pig diets, but they have been fed at diet manufacture. And if you're harvesting grain, for example, in a country like Ireland, where we got plenty of rain, you're harvesting basically that grain, whether it's barley or wheat, at about 18% dry matter. So in order to preserve it, we've got to reduce that to 15% dry matter. And typically we have used industrial dryers to do that. The problem is with industrial dryers is that it's quite expensive, but now there's a large carbon footprint in that industrial drying because you're using quite a lot of kerosene to do that. So that has increased our interest, for example, in the use of propionic acid and preserving the grain. So rather than using organic acids at diet manufacture, we're now using organic acids as actually once the grain has been harvested. And the results basically are phenomenal. We're getting phenomenal response to doing that. And where we have compared, for example, using preserved grain with 4 kilograms of organic acids and putting the 4 kilograms of organic acid in a diet manufacture, we are actually getting totally different results. Phenomenal response from the preservation of the grain. We're also getting no issue with so you're comparing dry matters in the region of about 80 or 14% versus 18%. But the chemical composition of the diets are exactly the same. And the mycotoxin levels in the grains are lower in the preserved grain than what they are actually in the dried grain. And we have fed this grain to post-wean pigs, we have fed it to sows, and we have fed it to finisher pigs. In the post-wean pig, we're getting a response after 4 weeks of weaning. We're getting a response in somewhere in the region of about 2 kilograms, 20 kilogram pig at 8 weeks versus 22 kilograms. At slaughter, we're getting in the region of about 6 to 7 kilograms increase in slaughter weight from the preserved grain over, for example, the dry grain. And we have done a lot of work recently looking at why are we getting that response. And first of all, what we see is that preserved grain has a much higher ileal digestibility and a much higher total tract digestibility than, for example, than what the dried grain has. So much higher digestibility. So that's partly explaining it. We're also seeing that preserved grain has a much higher feed intake, particularly in the wean pig. And we're getting intakes very similar to zinc oxide with preserved grain. So all this basically is leading to that increase in production, increase in growth that we're seeing. But also we're seeing major effects on the microbiome. When we feed preserved grain, we're seeing a major increase, for example, in fecal bacterium, where you're getting about doubling the level of fecal bacterium in the small intestine and also in the large intestine of, for example, preserved grain-fed pigs over dried grain-fed pigs. And we reckon that is leading to one of the major increases in growth and feed efficiency that we're getting. And also, if we look at the typical finisher pig in Ireland, will be finished about 26 weeks. We're getting about a 10% reduction in carbon footprint from preserved grain over, for example, dried grain as a result of the improved performance that we're getting, and also the fact that we're not using kerosene to dry the grain. And our work now is looking at moving on and looking at preserving beans, for example. And a country like Ireland, we import the majority of the soybean that we feed. So we're getting a very large footprint as a result of that. We don't really have natural protein sources, but one of the natural protein sources that we're enticed to grow is beans. So in order to avoid that drying process and also to reduce, for example, the level of anti-nutrition factors and issues with beans, we are now looking at the use of acidified beans in comparison to soybean meal, and we're getting very nice responses. And hopefully I can tell you about that in the future.
𝗔𝗽𝗽𝗃 Technologies manufactures 𝗟𝗶𝘀 swine precision feeding systems, designed by a family of pork producers for pork producers. The 𝗟𝗫𝘀 feeders are a simple, durable, and reliable solution, trusted by industry experts for all production stages. For 30 years now, 𝗔𝗽𝗽𝗃 Technologies has been at the forefront of innovation, continuously enhancing sow nutrition and delivering remarkable outcomes for producers. Contact 𝗔𝗽𝗽𝗃 Technologies specialists to learn more.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds very interesting. It sounds like a lot of promising work there. I think it's one just short final question that I had for you. You mentioned a little bit about the microbiome piece and how it promotes a healthier gut microbiome. What strains of microbiota in particular does it seem to promote that within the sow?
In the sow, what we're seeing in the sow is that a lot of producers are afraid to feed preserved grain because they're afraid of issues with mycotoxins. And in sow work that we have done, we haven't seen none of that issue. But what we have seen with the sow is that we have seen a much healthier microbiome in the late pregnant lactating sow as a result of feeding those preserved grains. And what we're seeing in particular is that we're seeing a reduction in proteobacteria in the sow at farrowing time. And as a result of that, we're seeing a much lower level of Enterobacteriaceae, a much lower level of E. coli in the pig at weaning time and throughout lactation. And I think this is one of the reasons why we're seeing the improved performance in that pig throughout its growth cycle, is because that we have built a more resilient and healthier gut at a very earlier stage.
Gotcha. Well, I believe that's all the time we have. So thank you, John, for coming on the show and sharing with us. And I hope we have you back at some point to continue this discussion, because it sounds like you have, like I said, some very interesting and exciting work going on over there.
Thank you, Chastain, and thanks again for asking me to talk this morning.
Yep, and to everyone else, thank you for listening to the Swine Nutrition Blackbelt Podcast. Please visit us at swinenutritionblackbelt.com, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channel so you won't miss out on the next episode. See you next week.